Hi, welcome back to the Wednesday night Bible study. We're in the series called Hall of Faith, and this is the 12th installment. We're looking at Moses. We're going to finish up the story of Moses, and this is demonstrating great faith, one of the Old Testament characters. So last time we talked about how Moses made a choice, and his choice was to leave Egypt. In fact, he made the choice to postpone his desires to help his people, God's chosen, the ones enslaved in Egypt. As the writer of Hebrews put it in verse 27 of chapter 11, by faith he, Moses, left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. So maybe Moses' mantra became, hey, be patient and wait for God's plan to unfold. As we learned, he settled in Midian, got married, and had a child. Let's reread Exodus 2, verse 21. Moses agreed to stay with the man, soon to be his father-in-law, who gave his daughter Zipporah to Moses in marriage. Zipporah gave birth to a son, and Moses named him Gershom, saying, I have become an alien in a foreign land. So it looks like he's settling into the normal life. In fact, we know he became a shepherd, not an uncommon occupation. But as we continue on in Exodus, verse 23 of chapter 2, during that long period, the king of Egypt died, the Pharaoh died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out, and their cry for help because of their slavery went up to God. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. So, 40 long years later, the burning bush incident occurs, and God speaks to Moses. You've all heard of the burning bush. That number 40 seems to be a significant number. I mean, we heard about it. Noah had rain for 40 days and 40 nights. But for Moses, he was part of the Pharaoh's household for 40 years. And then he went on to be a shepherd for 40 years. And now this happens in Exodus chapter 3, verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. God continues, So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I have seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. And now we come to important verse 10 of chapter 3. So now go, the Lord said. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. So it's time for Moses to deliver God's people. Ever obedient Moses has been given a command, and that is to go. Moses does return to Egypt. I'm sure that was a tough choice too. He wouldn't be coming back to a very warm welcome. I think it's well worth for you all to read Exodus 3 through 11 to see God's power. But for now, I'm going to give just the high points. Moses and Aaron are God's mouthpiece for his plan to deliver his people. God hits Egypt with the 7 plagues. Pharaoh is still not ready to let them go. We then come to the event which the writer of Hebrews writes about in verse 28. Remember, we're looking at by faith from the writer of Hebrews. He says, by faith he, Moses, kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. I'm going to read some of this from Exodus. I was surprised at how much detail God instructed Moses, and indirectly the people. This final act against Pharaoh and Egypt. The plagues have not seemed to have been working in changing Pharaoh's heart. So reading from Exodus chapter 12, starting with verse 5, this is God speaking to Moses. The animals you choose must be year-old males without defect, and you may take them from the sheep or the goats. Take care of them until the 14th day of the month, when all of the people of the community of Israel must slaughter them at twilight. Then they are to take some of the blood and put it on the sides and tops of the door frames of the houses where they eat the lambs. That same night they are to eat the meat roasted over the fire, along with bitter herbs and bread made without yeast. Do not eat the meat raw or cooked in water, but roast it over the fire, head, legs, and inner parts. Do not leave any of it till morning. If some is left till morning, you must burn it. This is how you are to eat it, with your cloak tucked into your belt, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand. Eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. So as you can see, God is giving them warning that things are about to happen. Keep your cloak tucked into your belt, and don't waste any time with food. Don't even leaven your bread. Then we get to verse 12. God says this. If you thought the other things were odd, here's the oddest part. On that same night I will pass through Egypt and strike down every firstborn, both men and animals. And I will bring judgment on all the gods of Egypt. I am the Lord. The blood will be a sign for you on the houses where you are, and when I see the blood, I will pass over you. No destructive plague will touch you when I strike Egypt. Let's look back at what the author of Hebrews wrote. By faith, he, Moses, kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. What could we say Moses' choice was? I'm going to offer this. He chose to be willing to do the unusual. He was willing to do the unusual. Here's a brilliant, well-educated man smearing blood on doorposts and instructing others to do the same, convincing other Hebrews. It's right up there with Noah hearing, I know it's not raining, but build me an ark. God speaking to Noah. Or Abraham plunging a knife into your child, Isaac. It's a matter of trust. It's a matter of obedience and making the choice to follow through. I think such a request from God would take great faith. But Moses had developed a relationship with God where he could discern what he heard was from God as opposed to some wild notion. So he was willing to do the unusual. It dawned on me that as opposed to the plagues, this involves Moses and then the people's participation. It involved their action. They're doing something. Now, the plagues that they had gone through required no faith on the part of the Hebrews. And in fact, for Moses, it only required faith enough to obediently send the message. But this was different. Moses and the people had to be willing to not just believe the unusual, but to do the unusual. Namely, put the blood on the doorposts. So let's read what happened. Verse 29 of chapter 12. At midnight the Lord struck down all the firstborn in Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh, who sat on the throne, to the firstborn of the prisoner who was in the dungeon, and the firstborn of all the livestock as well. What God says he's going to do, he does do. Pharaoh and all his officials and all the Egyptians got up during the night, and there was loud wailing in Egypt, for there was not a house without someone dead. And now we've heard the rest of the story, right? Pharaoh relents and lets God's people go, and then Pharaoh changes his mind and has his army go after them. But the Hebrews come to the Red Sea, and as you know, with the Egyptian army behind them, what happens? The sea parts, and they're able to cross the sea. And that brings us to chapter 11, verse 29 of Hebrews. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. One thing I kind of struck me, the way the Hebrew people complained up to the last minute, if you read the details as they're heading toward the Red Sea, up to the last minute of the crossing, I tend to agree with one commentary. The scholar said, the faith being talked about in this verse isn't the people's faith, the Hebrews' faith, but the author must be referring to the faith of all those who preceded them, like Abraham, Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. So by faith, by the people's faith, those forerunners' faith, they passed through the Red Sea as on dry land. Well, that takes us to the end of some examples of Moses' faith. His faith helped him guide his choices. I'm going to put those choices I brought up these last 3 weeks or 4 weeks on the screen right now. They were to refuse the pleasures of sin. He chose to do that. He chose to be willing to suffer, to leave the familiar, to postpone desires, and to be willing to do the unusual. So these are a list of Moses' choices inspired from the writer of Hebrews. Moses came into situations where he had to choose. And do you see where we're all called upon to make similar choices, one or more of those? It's doubtful that we'd be called upon to give up the life of a pharaoh, as Moses did, or to head off on our own to become a shepherd. And because Jesus Christ has already come and become our Passover lamb, there's no more need for smearing blood on doorposts. But can you relate to any or all of these choices? They can be hard. They can be scary. They often go against the ways of the world. But faith can help us make the correct choices. So there we have it. To refuse the pleasures of sin, to be willing to suffer, to leave the familiar, to postpone desires, to be willing to do the unusual. Moses can be an inspiration for us in these choices. So that kind of wraps up Moses. We'll continue next week with a new character. In the meantime, take care, and may the Lord be with you.